In the winter of 1901, in a narrow building on a street in Frankfurt called the Judengasse, clerks began carrying paper out into the yard. Ledgers, account books, correspondence going back more than a century, tied into bundles and stacked onto carts. 1,400 and 400 weight of it, weighed, recorded, and then hauled away to be pulped. Nobody had gone bankrupt. There was no run on the doors, no scandal in the newspapers, no missed payment. The bank whose records were being destroyed was solvent, respected, and owned by one of the wealthiest families in Europe. It was also the first Rothschild bank, the one in Frankfurt, the house that every other Rothschild bank in London and Paris and Vienna had grown out of. So how does the original close its doors while the family is still at the height of its wealth? The answer had been written 89 years earlier by a man who spent his whole life on a street he was not allowed to leave after dark. If you would rather have the documented version of a famous family than the version that gets passed around, you are in the right place. Stay with me and subscribe while you are here, because this whole story turns on a single sentence. The street was called the Judengasse, the Jews' Lane, and it ran in a shallow curve along the line of the old city wall, a little over 1,000 feet long, 10 to 13 feet wide. 3 gates. Jews had been ordered to live there in 1462, and for more than 300 years that is where they lived. The gates were locked at night. They were locked on Sundays. They were locked on every Christian holiday, and during imperial elections and coronations, when the city preferred not to be looked at too closely. 15 families moved in at the start. By the 1700s, there were more than 3,000 people inside, in fewer than 200 houses, subdivided and stacked upward and extended backward until the lane became one of the most densely packed places in Europe. Fire went through it in 1711, again in 1721, and again in 1796. There were rules about what you could do. Jews were shut out of the guilds, which closed off most crafts and most trades. Money changing, brokerage, second-hand goods, cloth. That was the permitted world. And there were rules about how many of you there could be. In 1616, the city fixed the number of Jewish families allowed in Frankfurt at 500, and the number of Jewish weddings allowed each year at 12. 12. A Christian couple had to prove only that they could afford to marry. Think about that for a second, because it matters more than it looks. A city council had decided that it could legislate the size of a family line. It could decide who was permitted to continue and who simply had to wait his turn. The man born on that lane in 1744 grew up inside that arithmetic. And when his own turn came, decades later and richer than anybody on the street could have pictured, his answer to it would be to write a rule of his own about who in his family counted and who did not. But in 1744, he was nobody's founder. He was the 4th child of a money changer named Amschel Moses, in a house called the Back of the Saucepan. The family name came from a building. Frankfurt houses had names long before they had numbers, and an ancestor of his had lived at one called the House of the Red Shield. The family moved out of it in 1664 and kept the name anyway. Rothschild. His parents wanted him to be a rabbi. He was 11 when smallpox took his father in 1755, and 12 when it took his mother the year after. Relatives arranged what they could, and in 1757, the boy was sent north to Hanover, to a Jewish banking house run by the Oppenheimer family. He worked there for around 6 years under Jacob Wolf Oppenheimer, and what he learned was the plumbing of 18th century money. Bills of exchange, currency conversion across 100 different German coinages, how credit moved between courts that did not trust one another. He also picked up something that looked, at the time, like a hobby. Rare coins, old medals, the kind of thing German princes collected the way other men collected horses. He came home to Frankfurt in 1763, joined his brother's money-changing business, and started dealing in coins and antiques alongside it. That is the detail everyone skips past, because it does not look like the beginning of a bank. It looks like a young man selling curiosities out of a crowded house. But collectors talk to collectors. One of the men buying from him was Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, heir to one of the largest private fortunes in Europe, who had bought from his father years before. In 1769, Rothschild asked the prince for a title and got it. Court factor, crown agent. He put the shield up on the front of the house. Here is what that shield was worth. Nothing, legally. It did not make him a citizen. It did not let him own property outside the lane. It lifted not one restriction. When the sun went down, the man keeping the accounts of a future prince of Hesse still had to be back behind those gates with everybody else. If he had stopped there, this would be a very different story, and a much smaller one. A respectable dealer, a good name on the lane, a painted shield on a door. In 1785, the Crown Prince became Landgrave Wilhelm IX of Hesse Castle and inherited the fortune. It was an enormous one, and where it came from was not complicated. Hesse hired out soldiers. British payments for Hessian troops flowed into the Landgrave's treasury for years, and all of that money had to be managed, moved, invested, and kept out of the way of whoever happened to be marching through Germany that decade. After the French Revolution, more and more of that work came through Rothschild's hands. He was never the Landgrave's only agent. He was the one who kept turning up with the better rate, the faster settlement, the quieter answer. He also had 10 children, 5 of them sons, which in the 18th century counted as infrastructure. Nathan crossed to England in 1798 and set up first in Manchester, then London. Salomon would settle in Vienna. Kalman, who became Karl, went south to Naples. Jacob, who became James, went to Paris at 19. Amschel, the eldest, stayed in Frankfurt with his father. 5 cities, 5 sons, 1 set of books. When one brother needed gold in Portugal and another had cash sitting in Frankfurt, they did not need a market. They had each other. On the 27th of September 1810, the arrangement was written down. Meyer Amschel Rothschild and 3 of his sons signed a partnership creating a firm called Meyer Amschel Rothschild and Sons, with James joining once he came of age. Profits were shared across the whole partnership, rather than kept by whichever branch earned them, which meant no brother could grow rich while another went under. They rose together, or not at all. Sitting inside that agreement, and inside the ones that replaced it, was a quieter provision about who was permitted to hold a share at all. Nobody in 1810 would have called it the important clause. It was housekeeping. The sort of thing a careful man writes down so the business stays the business. It would end up deciding when the firm died. Frankfurt, December 1811. For a short while it looked as though the lane might be finished. Karl Theodor von Dalberg, governing Frankfurt under Napoleon's reorganization of Germany, signed a decree granting the city's Jews the same civil rights as everybody else. The community paid for it. 440,000 florins, handed over in return for the annual protection tax being abolished, and the legal status of every Jewish family in Frankfurt changed at a stroke. They bought their own emancipation. That is not a figure of speech. There was a price, and they paid it. Meyer Amschel Rothschild lived just long enough to see it. He died on the 19th of September, 1812, at 68, and was buried in the old Jewish cemetery beside the lane where he was born. The grave is still there. Pay attention to what he wrote before he died, because it explains everything that comes after. His will left his widow, Gutlu, a life interest in 70,000 guilders. It divided his money among his children. And then it added a line about the business. His daughters and sons-in-law and their heirs, it said, were to have no share in the business. No share. Not a smaller share. None. That took in 5 daughters. It took in Henrietta, who had worked in the firm as her father's cashier. It took in every man any of them might marry and every child those marriages might produce. From then on, only Rothschild men could be partners in a Rothschild bank, and the family backed the rule up by marrying cousin to cousin for generations, so the capital never traveled outside the name. It reads cold, and by any modern standard it was. But look at what he had spent his life watching. 70 years under a law that capped how many families were allowed to exist and how many were allowed to marry. Rights that had to be bought with cash from a ruler installed by a French emperor, with no reason on earth to think the receipt would be honored. He was right about that. In 1816, 4 years after his death, Frankfurt got its independence back, rolled the rights back with it, and declared the money forfeit. The 12 weddings a year came back too. Full civic equality would not reach the city until 1864. So he built the one thing he believed could not be revoked. A family sealed shut. One thing before we go on, because it belongs right here in the timeline, and you have almost certainly heard it. The story that Nathan Rothschild stood at Waterloo in June 1815, watched Napoleon lose, raced back across a storm-lashed channel, and made 20 million francs before London knew the result, comes from one source. A 36-page pamphlet published in Paris in 1846 by a French polemicist called Georges d'Erneville, writing under the pen name Satan. He had gone after the family in print before, and he was open about what he thought of Jews. Nathan was in London that day. There was no storm on the channel, and there was no collapse in share prices for anyone to buy into. Goebbels made a film out of the pamphlet's version in 1940, which tells you plainly enough what it had always been for. Back to Frankfurt. Amschel took over the parent house. In 1813, he commissioned a new building on the Far Gasse, at the corner where the old lane met the rest of the city, and the bank moved in. Number 146. In 1822, the Emperor of Austria made all 5 brothers hereditary barons, and the Frankfurt firm became M.A. von Rothschild and Sons. The coat of arms they were granted showed a hand gripping 5 arrows. They could have lived off the Napoleonic years. They did not. Through the 1820s, the Frankfurt House pushed the Bethmann family aside to become the leading issuer of government bonds in the German-speaking world, which in plain terms means that when a German state needed to borrow, it came to the Far Gasse. In 1835, the bank joined the consortium that built the Taunus Railway, one of the first railway lines in Germany. In 1854, it helped bring the Frankfurter Bank into existence. Their mother stayed exactly where she was. Gutle Rothschild outlived her husband by 37 years. She died in 1849, and to the end she was in the old house on the lane, unchanged, receiving children and grandchildren who arrived from London and Paris and Vienna as barons and left as her sons. The Naples house wound down in the early 1860s, and its books were shipped back to Frankfurt and stacked in an outbuilding vault. Nobody thought anything of it. Paper accumulating in a cellar is not a story yet. Underneath all of it, something was shifting that no ledger recorded. London was becoming the center of world finance. Paris was vast. Vienna was imperial, and Frankfurt, the parent house, the one the others were still technically branches of, was quietly becoming the smallest room in the building. In 1864, Frankfurt finally granted its Jews full civic equality. Meyer Amschel had been dead for 52 years. If you are still here, you are somebody who wants the century in between, and not just the famous names at either end of it. That is rarer than it should be. Subscribe, and I will keep bringing you the parts of these families that usually get left out. By the winter of 1855, the founding generation was gone. Amschel Meyer died on the 6th of December that year at 82. He was the last of the 5 brothers to go, and the only one who left no children at all. Salomon had died in July, Karl in March. Nathan had been gone since 1836. The Frankfurt house passed sideways to 2 of Karl's sons from Naples, Meyer Karl, who was 35, and Wilhelm Karl, who was 27. They made an odd pair to run a bank. Meyer Karl was the public figure of the 2. Wilhelm Karl was something the family had not produced in a while. He was seriously, deliberately observant. He had studied in yeshivas. He kept a strictly religious household at a time when many wealthy German Jewish families were moving in the opposite direction, and he put his money behind Orthodox institutions in the city for the rest of his life. Some people in Frankfurt called him the tzaddik of the Rothschild house. His wife was Matilda, a cousin from the Vienna branch, who had studied piano under Chopin and went on to publish songs of her own. Meyer Karl and his wife Louise had 7 children. All of them daughters. Wilhelm Karl and Matilda had 3. All of them daughters. 10 girls between 2 brothers and not 1 boy. And this is where a rule written in a ghetto in 1812 stops being housekeeping and starts being a countdown. The clause that had held the family together through Napoleon, through the Congress of Vienna, through 5 cities and 4 generations, turned out to have one thing it could not survive, and it was not a war and it was not a crash. It was daughters. In 1886, Meyer Karl died. Wilhelm Karl became the sole owner of the parent house of the Rothschild Bank, at 58 years old, with 3 daughters, no sons, and an inherited rule that stated in plain language who was permitted to follow him. He had 15 years left. For every one of them, he knew exactly what was going to happen to the firm. He died on the 25th of January, 1901, at 72. With him, the male line of the Frankfurt Rothschilds ended. There is a reason people still find this ending hard to believe, and it is that nothing dramatic happened. The bank did not fail. It was not seized or ruined or forced into anything. It simply reached a morning on which, under its own constitution, there was nobody left who was allowed to run it. In theory, there were options. There were Rothschild men in London, in Paris, and in Vienna, plenty of them, all cousins, all perfectly eligible under the rule. But by 1901, Frankfurt was no longer the prize it had been. The city was Prussian now, part of a German empire run out of Berlin, and the centre of European money had long since moved to the Thames. Nobody was going to leave London or Paris to run a shrinking parent house in a provincial banking town out of respect for a great-grandfather. So the family did the arithmetic and closed it. What followed was orderly liquidation. The remaining business went to the Diskonto Gesellschaft of Berlin, which used it as the foundation of its own Frankfurt branch. The wind-up was run from London on behalf of the first Lord Rothschild by a senior clerk from the London house named Joseph Heim. And then they destroyed the archive. On the instructions of the surviving family, the records of the Frankfurt house, along with the Naples records stored beside them, were pulped. 1,400 and 400 weight of paper. More than a century of a bank's memory, from the founding partnership to the final balance, gone inside a few weeks. It is worth being accurate about the cause because this ending usually gets told too neatly. The rule in the will did not destroy the bank. Nothing destroyed the bank. What the rule did was remove the only successor the family permitted itself to have, and a century of shifting geography did the rest. Mayor Amschel had built a wall around his firm to keep the world out. In the end, the wall was the last thing standing, with nothing left inside it to protect. Here is the part that almost never gets told, and it is the reason I wanted to make this video. While the bank was quietly running out of heirs, the women it had excluded were putting up buildings with their names on them. Louise, Meyer Karl's widow, and her 7 daughters stood behind something in the region of 30 charitable foundations in Frankfurt: a dental clinic, a free public library, a swimming bath, orphanages, old people's homes, soup kitchens, hospitals, and funds to pay other families' school fees. Guntersburg Park came from them. So did the Clementine Children's Hospital, which Louise founded in memory of a daughter who died young and named after her. One of those daughters, Hannah Louise, never married and gave her whole life to it. In 1887, she founded a free public library in Frankfurt in her father's memory, modelled on the free libraries she had seen in England, and filled it with archaeology, art history, philology, Jewish theology, trade, and music. In 1890, she founded a clinic and named it the Carolinum, after him as well. She had meant it as an outpatients institution, like the ones she had seen in Paris. It became a polyclinic with a dental department. She died in 1892, at 42. Her mother gave 1 million marks to keep the library going in perpetuity and secured the clinic's foundation so that it could not be wound up. Matilda, Wilhelm Karl's widow, funded orphanages, sanatoriums, homes for the elderly, and research at Heidelberg, and lived until 1924. Wilhelm Karl left instructions of his own. The bank's building at Gasse 146 was given to the Jewish community of Frankfurt and, at his request, turned into a museum. The Museum of Jewish Antiquities opened on its first floor in 1922, one of the first Jewish museums anywhere in Europe. 10 daughters, none of whom was permitted a share in the trading business. Between them, a library, a clinic, a children's hospital, a park, and a museum. The Carolinum is still there. When the University of Frankfurt was founded in 1910, it was taken in as one of the original components, and it is the university's dental institute today. The library's collection, more than 93,000 volumes, was absorbed into the Frankfurt City and University Library in the 1930s and is still on those shelves. The old Rothschild residence at Unter Main Quay No. 15, where Louise raised those 7 daughters, is the Jewish Museum of Frankfurt. There is a Rothschild park in the city and a street called Rothschild Alley. The bank lasted 91 years, from the partnership agreement of 1810 to the liquidation of 1901, and there is not a brick of it left. Its own owners pulped its records. What survived is everything the rule kept out. Mayor Amschel Rothschild wrote that clause because he had spent his life in a place that could grant rights one year and cancel them the next, and he was trying to make one thing in the world that nobody could take from his children. He was not wrong to try. The rule worked for 4 generations. It just turned out that the half of the family he had walled off was the half that built the things a city keeps. If your own family has a story like that, somebody who built something and handed it on, or somebody who arrived with nothing and made a life out of it, put it in the comments. Those are the ones I read.